Welcome to the Full Nielsen. Today I'm going to be doing a review of the Nikon Black X 4K rangefinder. My brother told me about these the other day and I picked one up. I'm always looking for a rangefinder that will get me a bit more range without being ridiculously expensive. I'm not interested in spending $3,000 on a rangefinder, and the biggest reason why is because technology changes so fast that if you were to take a rangefinder that was several $1,000s that's 5 years old, there's a very good chance that you could find a rangefinder today that would cost you $200 or $300 and give you as good or better performance. That's just kind of the nature of technology. So for me, there are some things that aren't that way as dramatically, rifle scopes and stuff like that. You buy a decent rifle scope today, I don't think in 5 years it's going to be completely outdated. Same thing with rifles themselves, precision rifles. A good rifle, there are plenty of rifles that are, 30, 50 years old that will easily shoot pretty much as well as any of the rifles that they make today. Those things haven't changed that dramatically. Bullets and things like that have changed to really increase long-range performance. But anyway, enough of that rant. The rangefinder I owned before this was a SIG Kilo. I think it's either a 22 or 2300. I can't remember. I think it's the 2300 LRH, which is the Cabela's exclusive. It's the equivalent of the 2300 MR or whatever the other one is that SIG makes. It's basically the same thing. It was just one that was manufactured specifically for Cabela's. The 2400, I believe, is the one that has the ballistics app and everything built into it and all the stuff to be able to read your wind and temperature and all that. I'm not sure, somebody can correct me for sure, I just can't remember off the top of my head and I don't have my phone right next to me. But anyway, so the one I owned before this, SIG Kilo 2300 LRH. Now, this rangefinder, as the title of the rangefinder would suggest, is Black X 4K, 4K meaning it will supposedly reach out to 4,000 yards. For any of those of you who are unfamiliar with rangefinders, when they say, yeah, this one's good for 4,000 yards, you ought to know that that's like perfect conditions, nothing in the air and on a, reflective surface, a building or something that you might be able to, the rangefinder might be able to pick up. You're never going to get 4,000 yards on like sagebrush or just plain dirt. It will be a fraction of that, and I'll get into that today. But for any of you who own the SIG unit and want to know how this compares to something like the SIG, this rangefinder will give you way more range. There is no comparison. I mean, you're talking like double. I have ranged beyond 4,000 yards with this on those great big windmills out where I go shooting. They have some of those, and I was curious to know if it would pick some of those up, and it ranged beyond 4,000 yards on some of those big white, electric generating windmills. As far as sagebrush and stuff like that goes, on trees, I've ranged, I can range well beyond 2,000 yards on trees. On sagebrush and stuff like that, you're probably looking at maybe 1,200 yards, probably 12 to 1,400 yards or so. On juniper trees and stuff like that, I've ranged out to 2,600, 2,900 yards, something like that. Anyway, the performance on this compared to the SIG I had on sagebrush was probably more like consistently maybe 800 to 1,000 yards, somewhere in that range on sagebrush. This thing is more like 12 to 1,400 yards on sagebrush, maybe, it just depends. 1,600 yards on sagebrush, just depends on the conditions. I have been able to range things out in some of the areas I would shoot on a regular basis with ease using this rangefinder that the SIG wouldn't give me any reading at all. Wouldn't even come close, didn't matter how I steadied it, any of that type of stuff. On trees, the SIG might get me out to 1,600 yards. This thing will get me out to like 2,200, 2,400 yards on trees. So it's just a substantially better unit in terms of its sheer ranging performance when compared with the SIG. And I've also owned the Bushnell 1 mile rangefinder. I've owned quite a few rangefinders. This unit, for the price, will give you the most range of any rangefinder that I'm aware of will give you way more range, and even give you more range than a lot of rangefinders that are 4 or 5 times the price. That other SIG unit, the 2400, I guarantee that this unit will outrange it without a problem. So it's great in terms of its sheer ranging performance. Now, the build quality on this rangefinder, in my opinion, is nothing spectacular. I think the SIG is a better built unit. When you just the feel of it and stuff like that, I think this is a little bit lighter weight than the SIG. The eyepiece here does not adjust in or out so that you can hold it, firmly press it against your eye like you can with a set of binoculars or something like that and have a full field of view. You can do that with the SIG and with most other rangefinders. With this Nikon, you can't do that. You just kind of have to hold your eye a little ways away from it. If you were using that to like glass, that might be a problem, but I don't use a rangefinder that way. I don't know anybody who does, so I don't really see that as being a big issue. But overall, I'd say the build quality on the SIG unit is better than this. It just doesn't feel like it's built very well. I say that, but as you can see, the thing's all covered in crud and stuff like that from my last hunting trip. Never had any issues with it in terms of durability. I'm sure it will hold up just fine. It just doesn't feel quite as nice as the SIG does in that area for me. The other big difference is in terms of some of the functions, this has very limited functionality. It does not have any, and some of this bothers me, some of it doesn't. There's really only one thing that bothers me. But the one thing in terms of guys that like the A, B, C, D, stuff like that that Bushnell offers, that you match your rifle trajectory to that. You know, you pick the A, B, C, or D, whichever one's closest to your rifle's trajectory and bullet velocity and all of that, and then you match them. Then when you range, it will actually tell you the output in holdover in mils or MOA, and you know how to hold based off of that generic cartridge. Some people like those things. I could care less about those things because I find I'm not generally going to mess with my rangefinder unless I've got a lot of time. If an animal comes running out that's 100, 200 yards away, you know, that's really close, a distance for which I think the A, B, C, D, the generic bullet trajectory thing might be useful, I usually don't have a need for it. It's when I'm going far beyond that that I then have a need to actually know the holdover and all that type of stuff, in which case the generic output of these A, B, C, or D that don't match my rifle exactly don't do me a lot of good. I need something that's more precise than that, which is why I use ballistics calculator and Kestrel, stuff like that. So it doesn't have any of those features. It basically has 2 ways that it will give you range. One of them is angle compensated range, which will account for the angle of the shot, whether it's uphill or downhill, and give you what you should be putting into your ballistics calculator in order to be able to connect with the target. And the other one is just the line of sight range. Now, the one thing I don't like about this rangefinder that kind of bugs me is it has angle compensated range, but there's no way to use the straight range and it just give you a readout of the angle in the rangefinder itself. The reason this bothers me is because the way I do it is I like using straight line of sight range and then punching into my ballistics calculator. I like to punch in the shot angle that the rangefinder gives me independently. And the reason for that is because I let the ballistics calculator figure out how it actually needs to be shot at that distance, not just for the holdover, but also for the windage. When you use an angle compensated range, it's going to account for the holdover for you in terms of if you're shooting a steep incline or decline. And my understanding, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is true no matter the cartridge you're shooting, no matter the speed it goes, any of that type of stuff, that the angle just provides essentially a constant variable to that equation, and your ballistics calculator can still use that information and give you an accurate reading in terms of holdover. The issue is it doesn't do it for windage. So if you were to shoot at a really steep angle at a really long distance, it might tell you to shoot that angle, you know, I can't tell you off the top of my head what it would be. I've run some of the numbers, and the chances of getting into a situation like I'm talking about are really slim to none, but it's just not as precise as it could be. If you're shooting an angle compensated range to where it says the rangefinder is telling you 600 yards even though line of sight is 700, what ends up happening when you put that information in your ballistics calculator is your holdover should be spot on, but your windage is going to be 100 yards off. Now, is that going to be enough that you're going to mess? No, probably not. In fact, it's not even going to be enough that it is hardly notable. It's just that that's the way I'm accustomed to doing it. I prefer being as precise as I can. So it bothers me that they didn't make it to where it would display the shot angle. That's my only gripe with this unit. It will allow you to range if you were ranging, like had some trees in your way or some brush that's kind of semi-blocking your view. You can range you can set it for first priority or second priority, and it will range the trees that, or whatever object it runs into first, or it will range the target behind it, whatever you have it set for. So if you had an animal, say you were in an area where you could see the background of a big set of mountains in the back, and then you have an animal that's on a lower hill in front of you, and you're at a slope shooting uphill, you may have an issue where you would accidentally be reading the mountain behind instead of the mountain in front. The first thing that it's coming to, you can set that priority for first or second to help with that. They're marketing that as a big deal. It's not a big deal to me at all. I've never found an issue being able to range what I wanted to range with my rangefinders. So, yeah. So overall, way better performance than a SIG and anything else on the market in this price range, and probably anything on the market that I'm aware of that's under $1,000. If you're just after sheer range performance, it's a great unit. Build quality or having ballistics, programs built into it, any of that doesn't have that. This is totally bare bones. Doesn't really bother me because I use other equipment for, to be able to deal with some of those other situations. But overall, great unit. Yeah, that's all I've got to say about it. Thanks for watching the video. Have a nice day. See ya.